You're listening to the Otis Jiry channel. Beer and Worms by T.E. GRAU. Performed by Otis Jiry. Russ placed a six-pack of Store's Tallboys, a box of hooks, and a sealed fillet knife on the counter and waited patiently. It felt good to just stand there and do nothing. He'd left his watch at home, fingers absently touching the pale ring on his wrist where the hair had rubbed smooth. He gazed around the store, settling his eyes on the faded Chesterfield poster above the register, which showed Ronald Reagan smoking a cigarette. The Voice of the Turtle, it announced under his name, followed by ABC, always by Chesterfield. A forgettable country song filtered through a closed door in the back, blending with the bubbling of the minnow tanks and industrial hum of the coolers. The door opened and a wiry man emerged, carrying a box. "Land sakes, Russ, is that you?" he said, heading toward the counter. "Morning, Joe. Surprised to see you in here." "Oh, yeah? You know, being September and all. The beans will grow just as well without me for a day." Joe laughed. "Yeah, I suppose they will. Prices probably won't, though." He rang up the beer, slowly circling and punching the buttons on the register, as if he was trying to remember. Russ nodded to the hooks. "You got anything bigger than a 9/0? "Afraid not, Russ," Joe said, sounding more regretful than one would think appropriate for the situation. "Don't have much call for anything bigger around here. Maybe out by McConaughey, or where they got them 6-foot muskies. Take your arm off with one chomp." Joe finished ringing up the items. "No crawlers, huh?" "Not today. Mix up a batch of stink bait." Joe nodded. "Yeah, too hot for bass, I suppose. Too hot for anything but cats. Suckers and bullhead. Gar, maybe. Of course, the sunnies are always biting." Joe thought about this, crossing one of his eyes with concentration, then brightened back to attention. "You heading down to the Platte?" "Nah, going after that big sumbuck on the Johnson's back 40. "Oh, boy, old Dale says it's getting big enough to eat a calf." "Well, just as long as he's big enough to swallow a 9/0. Got some liver that'll work wonders. I'll go with the stink bait today. New recipe and all. Want to try it out." "You know best," Joe said, carefully putting each item into a separate paper bag. "When I was a kid, we used salmon eggs to catch trout." "Not much trout round here." "Yeah, true enough. That was back east, Aunt's place in Delaware." Both men stood in silence for a few moments. "It'll be $4.25, Joe said. Russ counted out a few bills and dug into his pocket for change. "Throw in some of that deer jokey, will you, Joe?" "It's coolie, all that's left from last year." "That's fine. It's not for me, anyway." The white wall tires spun quiet down the last few feet of asphalt before Dutch Hall Road gave way to gravel, marking the county line. Farm ponds dotted the wilder areas between 80-acre plots of corn and soybeans, collecting the spill-off below terraced hillsides. Most of the farmers didn't fish their ponds much anymore, and they'd be doggoned if they'd let any city folk traipse around their land in fancy hip-waders from Cabela's. And that meant Russ had the pick of the litter as far as fishing holes, and today he decided to pick Dale Jensen's place. Tiny rocks pinged off the undercarriage as a thick cone of gray dust billowed up behind the truck bed, where a Fenwick rod rested against the white plastic paint bucket and red metal tackle box. A pheasant rooster strutted across the road atop the next rise and disappeared into the plum thicket choking the ditch. Russ made note of the location, as no matter what this humidity told him, October would be here before you knew it. Russ turned off Dutch Hall and headed down County Road 23, easing past the slumping houses, rusted trailers, and mud yards of the Kennard outskirts, back out onto the arrow straight line of gravel until the strand of trees surrounding the Jansen farm came into view. He passed the dirt driveway, slowed at the cattle grate, separating two squared ends of barbed wire, and turned onto the grassy tractor path between the yellowing corn and the scanty shelter belt of piss elm and cottonwood. The truck bumped along the rutted slope, the tall fescue muffling the sound of the engine as it slithered underneath. He crested the hill and descended the other side to a low area in the land where 4 fence corners from 4 farms converged. The pond that had formed was mostly on Jansen land, but a bit of it bled over into the other plots, allowing them access. Even so, no one fished back there except Dale, as everyone else that had a claim was too old, too concerned about what they'd pull out of that pond after years of fertilizer runoff, or dead. Russ parked a good distance away from the water. He got out of his pickup, the various paper bags in his hand, and hauled the white bucket from the back, grunting under its weight. He chuckled to himself as he picked up his rod and tackle box with 2 spare fingers and swished his boots through the brome toward the pond. Dale sat in a frayed lawn chair just a few feet from the muddy shore, hunched over his line as he threaded an egg stinker just above the swivel. "You're putting all the fish to sleep." "Well, look at this," Dale said, spinning in his chair but not getting to his feet. Russ walked up and set the bucket next to Dale, who grinned at him from under the brim of his green Cargill hat, squinting through the sun. "Didn't expect to see you out here till after next planting." "Brought you something," Russ said, handing him a paper bag. Dale took it and peered inside, pulling out a hunk of dry, blackened meat. "Okay," sniffed the jerky. "This ain't mooley, is it?" "Shoot. What you got there is corn-fed Papio whitetail." "Velvet of the plains," Dale said with a smile and took a bite. He fought a frown. "A little gamey for whitetail. You take what you can get in September. Beer?" "Much obliged." Dale cracked open his tallboy and took a long drink. He burped and set about baiting his line, hooking a greasy shad to each prong. Russ hadn't yet touched his gear nor opened his beer in his hand. "Hotter than the dickens out here," Dale said. "Boy, you said it." Russ stared out at the unbroken surface of the water. The dead branches of a hackberry tree reached into the cloudless skies on the far shore. "Too hot for bass. Too hot for everything. Doubt even the bullheads will be biting much." "Bullhead'll bite in a tornado." "Yeah, I suppose so. I ain't going for bullhead today." Dale looked up at Russ, whose shadow loomed over him. "The big cat?" Russ grinned slyly. Dale returned to baiting his hook. Figured it had to be a special occasion. Russ took a seat on the bucket. "Sure is." Dale set his rod over his lap and took another swig. "Appreciate the beer." Don't mention it." "You bring the crawlers?" "No, sir." Russ slapped the bucket under his legs, which thudded like it was filled with cement. "Brung us some homemade stink bait." Dale whistled low. "Hate to think you went to all that trouble. Fish haven't been biting for squat." "Wasn't no trouble at all. I've been meaning to try out this recipe for a while. Coming down here and going for the big un just gave me an excuse." "Ready to get after it, huh?" "Figured I would. Got the freezer space." "Bring the camera?" "Back in the truck. Man's got to have a goal." "Nothing wrong with that." "Boy, you said it." Dale opened another beer and lit up a Winston, while Russ packed his lower lip with Skull. He rubbed a little on his upper lip, under his nose, stood, and peeled off the lid of the plastic paint bucket. He reached in and pulled out a handful of bait that looked like dark brown cookie dough, peppered with flecks of red and white. Dale wrinkled his nose. Yeah, that's ripe. Not quite primed, but it'll get there. Russ handed the glob to Dale, who looked up at him. Give her a shot. Dale shrugged, ripped the 3 small fish from the tines, and formed the stink bait into a ball around the hook. He grimaced at the odor. How's Nancy? Russ spat. Well, you know. He grabbed his own water bait, pressed the lid back on the bucket, and sat down on it again. Dale shot a glance at Russ before casting deep, pulling the line up short so the bait fell with a mushy plop a few feet in front of the stand of downed trees. Surprised she let you come out, with the season and all. Dale reeled in his line a crank or two, then let it sink to the bottom, anchoring the handle into the sandy mud and resting the reel seat lightly in his palm. That's some heavy bait, Russ chuckled. Use the good stuff. Gonna have to give me that recipe, Dale said, if it works. That's a deal, Russ said, throwing his own line into the pond, close to Dale's, but still far enough away to avoid a tangle. Dale exhaled a hiss of smoke. Kids? Chris left for Lincoln last week. Won't see him till Thanksgiving, most likely. Connie hasn't called for a while. Still got a girlfriend, I hear. They sat as the sounds of the late summer insects danced in the grass around them one last time. You hear about old Denny Goach? Dale stubbed out his cigarette in the wet soil. Shame what happened to him. Hogs took him down to nothing. Only left the skull and his right foot 'cause it wouldn't come out of the boot. Hammertoe came in handy at the end. I suppose them old boars could eat a tractor tire if you left it in the pen. Gotta watch 'em close. Shoot 'em if they get too big. Shoot 'em all if you've got a bad heart. And the Hammertoe. And they both laughed. A shame what happened to him, though, Russ said. Sure is. Wife and kids left without a man. Crop still in the field, and he just paid off his combine. He's going to move them hogs to market. Won't give my auger back now. Denny had it 2 years. Never brought it up. Probably get it back at the auction. Yeah, I suppose. Something large and broke the surface of the pond, rolled, and shimmied back to the bottom. There's your hoss, Dale said. He put another cigarette between his lips. You don't seem to like the bait. Dale glanced sidelong at the bucket, then up at Russ. Russ reeled in slowly. You got something on your mind? Dale took off his hat and wiped his brow. He was sweating more than the heat demanded. Well, I gotta tell you, he said, winding up. I'm just real surprised to see you out here, is all. With the way Nancy got after you last time you came out fishing while the crops were still in the field, You what? Well, I got a whole lot of respect for you. Doing what you wanted to do, pissing on the consequences. Lord knows Nancy can get difficult. Russ spit, removed the chew from his lip, and flicked it to the ground. I killed her, Dale. Dale blinked at the distorted reflection of the sun glinting off the pond. How's that? I killed her. You killed who? Nancy. Dale swallowed hard, smoke sputtering out of his nose. Good Christ, Russ. What'd you go and do that for? She's running around on you? Nancy? Shoot, Russ snorted. A guy can get pretty desperate, but I don't know a man alive within 1,000 miles that would want to lay down with a cripple. Slipping on her chores, then? She don't move as well as she used to, I suppose. No, that wasn't it either. She was doing enough, doing what was expected of her, I guess. Dale clamped his teeth together. So then what? Russ's eyes followed a fleck of starlings that were swarming around a lone cottonwood the next field over, fighting for a limb. Last week, I was sitting there in the kitchen, stirring my coffee, thinking about how nice it would be to stop by Joe's, pick up some beer and some worms, and head out here to go after the big one. Then I thought about having to ask permission. Having to ask permission from a woman. What's the world come to? Dale shrugged his shoulders a few times as if he was trying to loosen something inside of him. Russ reeled in his bait and looked the ball end of the hook. Not even a nibble taken out of it. If a man can't fish when he wants to, he ain't no man at all. Dale popped open another beer. Loose Winstons fell to the mud from a shaking softpack and sucked up the pond water. So anyway, I walked up to Nancy while she was frying up some eggs, thinking about how I was going to ask her about me going fishing, when I should have been telling her, and then it dawned on me. Russ opened a beer and set it down without taking a drink. What did? Dale's voice was hushed and failing, as if he started talking at the very end of a breath. I'd rather kill her. I'd rather kill her than ask her. Dale worked his tongue, searching for moisture. The surface of the pond broke with the gulp of a giant mouse swallowing a feather it mistook for something else. So she's lying there, outside, because I didn't want her to bleed out all over the kitchen floor. Head wounds spurt like something else, with the arteries and all. And I figured what I'd done could kill two birds with one stone. Russ, I need to get rid of that mess. And now that I have all this free time to fish, I'll need money for bait. Tackle I got, that don't wear out. But bait, well, that's another matter. That's out of pocket. Joe don't run tabs these days, and I got the old cob grinder my daddy left me. A few spare buckets left from painting in the barn. Dale's long ash hung from his cigarette, like a bent, shriveled finger. With the weather being so muggy, I figured she'd cure up right in a few days and make some darn good stink. That was last Thursday. Dale smelled his fingers, then leaned over and retched, the chair breaking apart, sending him to the mud. It's the funniest thing, Russ said. Human beings fall just like hogs when you hit 'em square between the eyes. I wonder if old Denny Gritch knew that. Russ reeled his line from the water and dangled the dripping stink bait in front of his eyes like a swinging medallion. I had to tap Nancy on the shoulder to make sure she turned around first. Then Russ snapped his fingers, causing Dale to jump. He clambered backward toward the grass in the direction of the truck. Russ walked after him, guiding the stink bait through the air, twirling it in circles. Now the only question is, Dale, old boy, you going to keep fishing, or are we going to go do something else? Dale wiped the puke from his chin, sat up, and took a deep breath. Let's fish.